Okay.
Yeah, perfect. And then we'll leave like 5 minutes towards the end for questions and stuff. Cool.
All right.
The floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you for the heartfelt welcome anyway. But I'm going to talk to you about server-side backbone, which is actually my first ever real-world Node project as well. And I've been working on this for about 8 months now. And the premise for it wasn't initially that interesting, if you call it for what it is. It's a remake of a website, specifically tuulilasi.fi, which is, well, it's an automotive magazine. And we were going to do this, redo it responsive. But we added a little twist to it that it turned out not to be really interesting, but also a first, or at least one of the very first in its class. And as Oleg mentioned, I work for SC5, and we call ourselves the HTML5 company. So we pretty much knew from the get-go that we were not going to settle for just selling a project that's just a responsive website, just some HTML and CSS and things like this. We've worked a lot on single-page apps. We have had some really good experiences with that. So we knew we were going to leverage this experience and knowledge with that. But there was a slight problem. This website depends heavily on search engine love, and that's kind of exactly the opposite of what single-page apps do, because most of the time they are just an empty index page, which is then built upon on the client using JavaScript. So anyway, the parameters were a responsive design website, but we wanted to use a single-page app, but it needed to be robot-friendly. This is how we kind of, this was what we were, or what Ale had bought from us. But anyway, officially the project was started in January, but we already started on our own in December, because we knew we were going to be working with a Drupal backend, and none of us had any experience of that, or at least nobody wanted to mention that they do, because then they would have had to work with Drupal. But we kind of did what everybody does. We download the source code or read the how-to instructions for setting up a quick Drupal, and we found some modules that sort of made it work like a RESTful API. But as it turns out, the current version of Drupal doesn't really work really well as a RESTful API. But anyway, that was what we were going to be working with, so we had to solve it somehow. But we put what we did was we put a Node server between our actual application and the Drupal to work as a kind of a translating reverse proxy, and that turned out to be a really convenient way to kind of transparently make Drupal look like a nice REST API. And also as a bonus, that means that you could eventually change the underlying technology and your application wouldn't really be affected. So if you're going to use Node for anything, that might be one thing if you ever have to use Drupal. But besides single-page apps, going down to technology, we like Backbone a lot because it's pretty mature already. It's really simple to learn and use, and it's very, very flexible. And also it's quite extensively used. There's a large community, so the likelihood of finding a solution for any problem we would encounter would be, or the probability for finding solutions that exist already was pretty high. And we had already used Backbone models and collections on the server successfully, and I kind of expanded on that we could have the whole application on the server, and then I expanded that a little bit further to run the same application on the server and the client. And this was pretty brave because there were no precedents at that time for this. There wasn't even any experiments on obscure blogs at the end of the internet. But strangely enough, our client trusted us and said, okay, you can look into this, and if it works, we'll go ahead. And we did. But this was, of course, this was back in November. Probably now you already know there's at least, or I know of 2 solutions that kind of do the same thing. There's Render by Airbnb, which is it's an extension of Backbone actually, kind of. It extends view, model, and router, and it's pretty opinionated what you should do. Then there's something called Otter by Ben Firschman, which is it's a bit more ambitious. It claims that it can run any client-side code on the server, and it does this by simulating a browser environment. But anyway, in November, none of those existed, so we kind of started doing our own thing. Now, we've been using Backbone. I've been using Backbone for years and years, and one part which Backbone doesn't do very well is the view part, because it's sort of like the last Christmas tree on the lot. You can take it home and put it in a corner, but it doesn't really do anything to raise your spirits until you hang a lot of ornaments on it. And this is kind of the view for me. You always end up putting the same things on it, but I found earlier that Layout Manager pretty much contains everything that you need, and I've always used it, and I was really overjoyed when I found out that it kind of set right in on a Node server. You didn't have to patch anything, and it uses Cheerio as the DOM, not any headless browsers or anything, so it's really fast as well. So we had our stack. We had Backbone, Layout Manager, we had Express for HTTP, and handlebars and queue promises and things like this for kind of helping out where for other things. Sugar, but really useful sugar. But anyway, we had our stack settled, so we started putting together a kind of prototype of the application. It was really, really easy. It was just about a day or so, and we could render a website on the server, which was usable, and it was fetching data from Drupal and so forth. And this was really nice because this was really the most crucial component for this project, because now we had a crawlable website, at least in theory we did. And then we did the thing in the client, which is also pretty simple, or at least it should be, because that's what you do with Backbone, right? And it was really dead simple. It was just applying a different set of configuration for the browser. But there was a an obvious problem, which was that when you land on a page, it's just HTML. There's no kind of Backbone doesn't automatically hook up to anything. But Backbone's flexibility kind of rescued us here, because once we recognized the problem at the point where we, on our lorem ipsum pages, added in a comment form, and that, of course, that doesn't work unless it's on the second page, because then Backbone has already rendered it for you. But due to Backbone View's flexibility, there's the option of either having Backbone create a DOM node for you, or you can give it a node that it should sit on. So we use data attributes and a clever little DOM lookup and initialization to kind of restore the state that we had on the server in the browser on the first page. And voila, everything works perfectly. Okay, so then came January and the real world greeted us. We had a really nice working prototype here, but as I said, we didn't know anything about Drupal, and turns out our out-of-the-box how to manual install Drupal was pretty far from the actual installation. If that API was worse than the actual Drupal API was, well, I don't really know the words for how to describe it, but it's fucked up. But anything, even though our prototype was really simple at this stage, the parts which actually make the kind of magic happen have mutated surprisingly little during the course of the project. I mean, they've been refactored over and over and rethought a few times, but the actual mechanics haven't changed at all. The cogs are more refined or so. But then again, there's the application space, which is why this, if you want to call it a platform, exists. And writing code that needs to live in several environments requires rules and discipline, because everything that's outside or an external, resource, you need to kind of abstract away the way you use it. And you can either use standardized APIs, or you can use events, or you can use a bowl of spaghetti. And the spaghetti kind of, it's really easy to get into because you have a thing on the server and then you may need to do something really differently on the browser, and kind of it becomes really tempting to just use if window exists and whatnot. And this is kind of what I like to call the graffiti wall syndrome. If you put a little bit of paint on a wall, somebody's going to put a little more, and then all of a sudden you can't even see the wall and wonder why you put it up there in the first place. And it's really easy to fall down because abstractions make code hard to read, uh, especially when things are kind of event-based and they just trigger off things here and there. You don't find things, and debugging gets harder, and you want to keep the code where it's actually used. But that means that you need to set some rules, and the first one is, of course, that views must be self-contained. You simply cannot use or access anything outside your own scope. And of course, all of these rules apply mostly to the views because models and collections are just data, and that doesn't really change anywhere. And views cannot have hard external dependencies. We did the exception that we are allowed to access, a view can access its immediate children if it's really, really necessary. And if it's a modular view, then even better, but we didn't keep that as a rule. But then again, sometimes you need to break the rules just to stay sane. And, well, we have sometimes. But anyway, at this point, we have a working website with server-side rendering, and it's working as a single-page app when it's not server-side rendered. And there's really almost no code duplication for these two parts. And it's been an exciting, very interesting, and at times immensely frustrating project. But our immediate goal, or our initial goal, was to build this platform with as little proprietary code as possible. So completely different approach from render or other. And we've actually done that really well. The kind of server-side part of our code is less than 300 lines if you exclude configuration, which there is a lot of. But anyway, even though the project that we started on wasn't really that interesting, it was mostly a read-only project, which turned out to be really ideal for our first real-world test for what you can do with an idea like this. There's a lot of interactivity as well, so it was pretty cool. Hardest parts in building the application and the website have been third-party code, of course. I was actually pretty surprised how poorly things like Facebook and AdThis integrate into single-page applications. And ads, of course. Everybody loves ads, right? But anyway, it has been a really interesting project. I've learned a whole lot about Node backbone, debugging single-page apps. And I've learned that refactoring is your best friend. You really need to refactor all the time, especially when you're developing something in the sense that I have this feature which I need, I'll make it work, and then I'll make it pretty later. But if you make later too much later, then it's never going to happen. So refactor all the time. But anyway, I'm also really happy with the outcome, and it will only get better with time. We now have a single website out, and we're going to start on the next one. And whoops. All right. Maybe I'll skip. Did you read that? Anyway, what it says is that I would really like to have concluded my presentation saying that now you should all clone our GitHub repo and start experimenting, but I can't because it's not out there yet. Partly this is due to legalities or contractual details. We haven't really figured out how much of the code we can reuse and how much we just have to reuse our knowledge about it. And then there is, of course, the fact that it's really new. I wouldn't want to show that code to anyone really. But yeah, we will eventually release something, but I can't tell you when that will be. So if there are any questions, this is. Yep. There's one.
All right. What can you tell us about like server-side rendering performance? Like how long does it take to render a page?
It doesn't really take any time at all. It's much faster than in the browser, I'd like to say.
And faster than in Drupal?
Well, depends. I mean, you can throw a shitload of hardware against Drupal and it'll be pretty quick, but certainly it's very quick. I haven't done any benchmarks, so I can't tell you any absolute numbers, but it's really quick.
So at least you haven't run into any problems with.
No, there's no performance problems there, no.
Okay, cool.
Look into the Google's URL fragment thing, because there's this thing where they send like an extra parameter, and then you can kind of show a different page to Google without, and then like to normal users just show a standard single page app. Did you look at that as part of this project?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Actually, I haven't heard about that.
Yeah, so there's this kind of a way to have Google index your single page apps. Yeah, it's called escape fragment something or other.
But there are other search engines than Google as well.
And then the second question was to do with like modules.
Mm-hmm.
Did you end up using the same module system on the server and within the browser, or was the code just kind of like?
No, we use the exact same code.
Okay. So which of those? Maybe I missed it as part of the talk, but which one was it that you used? What did you use? Require.js style AMD modules?
You're talking about actual JavaScript modules.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, that was kind of I was a bit ambivalent whether I should include details such as that, but that was actually quite an interesting bit. We started out using UMD modules, but if everybody has ever looked at the UMD signature, it's pretty horrible. So we went back to writing common JS modules, and for development we use a loader called Cajon, which transforms them on the fly into require modules, and then we have a build script which then transforms them for the final deployment.
Cool, sounds good. Anybody else have any questions? Anybody?
There's one.
Yeah.
Hey, so you talked about nesting views. Can you talk a little bit about messaging between the views, like from the parent talking to the children and the other way around?
Well, if you're talking to the child view from the parent, it's most likely it's going to be either a global event bus or a direct function invokement. Backbone Layout Manager actually has a really convenient, or it used to have a really convenient way, mechanism of where custom events bubble from the child view to the parent, like they do in the DOM, but we're talking about custom Backbone events here. Unfortunately, in the most recent version, the 0.9, they took it out, but it's really easy to patch in there again. And actually, I mentioned it to Tim Branyan that I found it very useful, and it might be an optional feature in the future.
All right, thanks.
So can you quickly go through the benefits that you get from having a single page application? If you are in a position where you can actually render all the HTML in the back end and then serve it to the client, what extra benefits do you get from having a single page application built on top of that?
Well, it's an argument you potentially can never win, but either way, I mean, personally, I like this approach because we can build a big monolith which has everything in the client already existing there without, except for the data, of course. So potentially, especially in the mobile world, you can speed things up a little bit because there's or mobile connections because there's less kind of data flowing back and forth. But then again, it's arguable because rendering in the browser, especially on the low-power devices, can be really painstakingly slow sometimes. But it's you have to find a good middle ground there where you have the benefit of having things in the browser and then, well, it's it goes both ways. I mean, it's less data to transfer, but it may be less performant. Kind of, you have to find the best compromise, which works best for you.
Do you use the server-side rendered pages for clients also who have JavaScript disabled, or is it only for search engines?
We use server-side rendered pages for all the browsers that don't have the history API. But it still requires that you run JavaScript in the browser because it's a backbone application. So this is by no means it's not a replacement for an actual application server in the backend. The logic is still only in the JavaScript.
Okay, cheers.
Hi. As we have discussed Angular a lot on the client side today, what's your take on Backbone's future now with its reputation dropping?
Is it?
Yeah, according to Google Trends at least. No, but
it's just the hipsters are running to the next cool new thing, but
might be.
I mean that's only logical because I mean it hasn't evolved that much lately, so maybe that's why. I mean it's still just a library that requires that you do really quite a lot yourself. So that might be why full stack frameworks are becoming more popular.
Yeah. Just one follow-up question. Have you run into the problem that you need to kind of patch together like a lot of different components to get your application running instead of just writing everything? Like Backbone has a lot of open source projects that you can use together with it, and you have to find the good solutions. There's a lot of different solutions for all the problems. Have you had any trouble with that?
Not really. I mean, we're only really using Layout Manager as that with regards to Backbone extensibility, and then our own small patches.
Yeah, okay. Because I once spoke with someone who had like 30 or 40 different.
I mean, you can do that if you want to, but
yeah.
I mean, we're using a lot of third-party code. In my opinion, we're using too much at the moment, but we haven't got to optimizing anything yet. I mean, it used to be that it was really hard to find code and everything, but nowadays it's really easy to just npm install anything or use Bower. But there is, of course, the fact that for this particular scenario, we needed the same or at least an equivalent library in both environments. So we had to be kind of picky what we were using. So
yeah,
that probably limited our choices a little bit as well.
Yeah, thanks.
I thought I'd turn the tables on you. You mentioned like Angular, and I know that Davis is in the audience somewhere rooting for Ember.js. So my question is to the audience, what's the server-side rendering story like with other client-side frameworks? I don't know, maybe Davis, you want to start? Ember.js, can you do server-side rendering?
Yeah, there's been some stuff that's happened since I was last year with server-side rendering and Ember. I know there's this really great example web application called Discourse that I'm sure someone's heard of, built with Ember.js and Rails, and it serves content really nicely to search engines. You might want to have a look at that if you're interested. And I know you can do some stuff with Phantom.js. Sounds a little bit overkill to me to do that and serve static content to your search engines or whatever, or do fully server-side rendered Ember.js. But yeah, I haven't been working with Ember.js for a few, well, maybe 5 or 6 months now. I've been doing other things, so.
Yeah, we are actually currently building a single page application with Angular where our data is coming from a separate server, so or actually multiple servers. So we're using Phantom.js for first going through the data that our application gets and then just rendering static pages out of it. So basically the thing is we serve different content to different users. So there are a lot of issues with that, but aside from that, I think it works pretty well so far, or I think it will work well. But at least there don't seem to be any bigger problems with that.
Just a quick comment. That seems really complex to do just for SEO, especially since Google does do quite a lot of JavaScript. I know from first-hand experience. Well, not from working at Google, but from seeing my own web pages that Google actually uses the services that the web page service uses and then renders the data on the page, and that's what Google sees and that's what Google indexes. So in a sense, that does remove many of the reasons why to do this.
Okay.
Yeah,
but I'd like to contest the issue, the complexity part, because it really isn't. I mean, the complexity is mostly discipline and good design, and you may want to have that in your application anyway.
Yeah.
It's just transferring the state from
Yeah, well, and the problem is that Google isn't the only search engine, especially in Asia. So, and other problems are that Facebook does not scrape your JavaScript, which makes sharing your pages a less rich experience, and you can't have stuff like Open Graph, which is a huge limitation for our thing where we use the Open Graph features a lot. So yeah, not having server rendered content is not an option at this point.
I'll say a couple of words. So I think there's actually two problems. I think Niklas touched upon them. One is essentially the sort of SEO side of things and making sure search engines pick up your content. And I agree that certainly Google, in my experience, is like a black box. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. At Start HQ, it didn't work. So the screenshots were all we're using Angular on the server. All the screenshots were like blank white pages. And that's because we have pretty complex logic for signing users in and determining what to render. So it doesn't work quite as well as you'd expect it to. And so what we do is we front or we pre-render some stuff using Phantom and then serve that to Google using the escape fragment thing that was mentioned. But then the second problem, which is also a very valid one, is sort of the whole mobile story. And latency is a huge problem. So if your single page app makes 5 requests that all depend on each other to be able to render your content, your users are just going to leave your site before they see anything. But I think that there is a hybrid solution, at least with Angular and presumably with Backbone and other frameworks that you can apply there, which we're contemplating, which is to essentially render sort of the entry point, like the index HTML on the server, but inject into it pre-cached API responses that you expect that page to make. Which essentially, and it's possible, just like you can populate the template cache in Angular, it's possible to pre-populate the XHR cache.
Now that sounds complicated to me.
Well, it's whatever. It's Angular.
But anyway,
let's leave it at that. But anyway, the point is, then you can have a situation where you have a single page app that essentially doesn't make any additional XHRs and is able to kind of bootstrap itself from inside the content that's already part of the DOM that's been sent down the wire once. So. I know that's something we're going to play around with, and we're probably going to do a talk about a year from now, saying how terrible of an idea it was. But
I'm sure there's going to be many similar kind of solutions popping up nowadays because you can do so much more in the server. But our kind of motivation was exactly to remove the need for code duplication, having the same kind of, well, it was fun. It's been a really fun project, and I'm really happy the way it turned out.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your talk.
All right.
Let's give a round of applause.
All right.